So let's get started. My name is Steve Jewell. I'm the Director of Brand and Marketing at Depop. And I am here today, very happy to be here today in collaboration with the Purposeful Project to talk about the secrets of effectively collaborating with influencers and communities. Any questions you have along the way, pop them in the chat. We'll save some time for a Q&A at the end too. And our friends at the Purposeful Project, excuse me, I should really get that name right, are also in the chat, kind of moderating too. So here is some of what we're going to be talking about today. A quick introduction about myself and about Depop, since Depop is obviously a common thread that will come up throughout the talk. A little bit about the reasons for collaborating. Some notes on community building, some notes about how the working with influencers has evolved over time. A little bit more about brand partnerships, which is sort of a separate but very connected stream of community building and influencer work. And then just a little summary and some time for a Q&A. So first, who am I? Who are we? I'll tell you. Whoops, that went fast. So as I said, I'm the Global Director of Brand and Marketing at Depop. That team, I have many talented teammates who work alongside me. It includes our global marketing team, our global brand team, as well as organic social, and then a few people who are dedicated specifically to brand partnerships. So partnerships with other companies in the fashion space or outside of it. We'll talk about that a little bit more in more detail later. Before I got to Depop, I was working as a writer and an editor, mostly writing about men's fashion, also a little bit of style and design for a whole host of publications on a freelance basis, including the New York Times and GQ and Vanity Fair and a bunch of places like that. I'm based in London now, but I was living in New York for a long time. I started out my career after university working in public relations and some sponsorship work, sort of in marketing teams, mostly focused in fashion, but also doing some crisis communication, which is a hell of a way to kickstart a job after school, as well as financial PR before I finally found my way to fashion. And like I said, I'm from New York, so you can take the guy out of New York, but you can't take the New York out of the guy. A little bit about Depop. I hope everyone is at least familiar with Depop, which means that me and my colleagues are doing our job well. But we are a fashion marketplace where people can buy and sell secondhand fashion. We're not only a marketplace app, and we're very much designed from a social first and a community first point of view. So there's a lot of people who interact and engage with Depop to get inspired, to find people who share similar style interests or have a similar urge for style exploration, and kind of really focusing on that community building element of it. And also part of that is we're really fostering this young entrepreneurial community, not unlike I'm sure many of yourselves, to really create trends from the bottom up, so to speak, so no longer dictated from fashion down, and really focusing on making secondhand accessible. This is kind of our mission statement, which I think informs a lot of our point of view about community building and talent partnerships in general. In short, we really are looking to build the world's most diverse, progressive home of fashion, and really kind of keying into people who are interested in style exploration and style inspiration. And so knowing that is our mindset, that very much informs the type of people and partners that we look for. We'll talk a lot about shared values and about kind of identifying people who share the values of your brand. And this is the point of view where we're coming from at Depop, which is really great to have it so clear and also so clearly articulated, because it's sort of everything ladders up to this mission statement and this point of view, which makes our work doing our work a lot easier. So for some context, we've worked with a whole host of different partners in the time that I've been at Depop, which has been just over 4 years. From Megan Thee Stallion, who was kind of our first real large-scale celebrity partner. Fashion brands like you can see here with Ralph Lauren and Vans, also Adidas and Rodarte and Doc Martens and a whole host of other brands that are really relevant to our young community. Charlie XCX is another talent partner who we've done a campaign with recently in 2022. And this one in the middle of The Sims 4 was really new for us and kind of pushing the boundaries of the types of brands and partners that we could find outside of the world of fashion. It was a really fun partnership and obviously super culturally relevant. Hopefully some of you also saw some about that, if we have any Sims heads on the live. But this was a way that we could kind of enter into the gaming space for the first time. And we worked with some creatives from our community to design pieces that were then available for your Sims to wear in-app, in addition to styling some looks and things like that. So it was really exciting. And it's definitely something that will live on beyond just the campaign period as well. So that's some useful background, hopefully. I think what any conversation around effective secrets needs to start at the core, which is why do you collaborate? So what are sort of the perks about collaboration? This is an insight that we learned from our own community research that we did in-house with our vast kind of Depop community, that 80% of users' inspiration comes from their peers on social media, and more than half of that is specifically their friends. So it's their own networks and then sort of, you know, a few steps out. I think that's really key because some sort of outdated, I think a little bit, way of thinking about partnerships is that it's brands or it's creative directors or it's strictly talent, like celebrities who are driving trends and inspiration. And really, it's much more about your community and the sort of extension and offshoots of your community and finding people that you can relate to, for young people specifically. And so that's also something that is, you know, at the core of all of our talent and partnerships work. I think one thing that is really useful to understand about all of these opportunities is it ultimately is about relevance, about showing up where your community is, but also about what you do when you show up there. And so in this instance, we like to think about brand storytelling as very, very closely connected to this idea of creating culture. So it's, what are you sort of leaving behind? What are you doing? What are you making within the culture that has relevance that you can then use as a conduit to tell more stories about your brand? So I think we'll go into some specifics around ways that people have worked with influencers before that I think the culture has kind of moved on from. And it is a lot more about creating something of value that stands on its own and using that as the springboard to talk about your values, to talk about your mission as a brand, and kind of get in that way, as opposed to just traditional advertising, which is still very important and still has a place in all of your marketing mix, but it's not sort of apples to apples with an influencer strategy or a talent strategy. I think ultimately, if we had to really boil it down to some of the benefits of collaboration in terms of the things that they can bring for your company within that storytelling, it's authenticity, influence, and then amplification. So authenticity will be repeated a lot here. And I think it's really, really key, as most audiences are much more well-informed about the influencer economy, you know, what it means. There's legal, ramifications and restrictions and guidelines now about disclosures. So it's all kind of out in the open. And that means that the sort of easy way into these partnerships of just picking the person who has a lot of followers or picking someone who's having a moment right now isn't the full picture of the story. What are you actually trying to bring that's real, that has a real point of view, and that's backed up with the rest of your partner's output and persona and interests and sort of their own missions. And I think a lot of the way into that is looking at partnerships with influencers in particular as an opportunity to let them sort of speak on your behalf, as opposed to forcing them into sort of brand talking points. They have communities of their own that they've built, however they've done it. So let them be the ones to talk about your brand in the way that they want to, and the way that they know will authentically resonate with their community. And like I said, that point about the peer-to-peer influence is super important. I think in what we're seeing right now with places like TikTok, in particular, which is obviously hugely influential and takes up a lot of share of mind for a whole generation of people, it's about this engagement in terms of conversation driving that is really what resonates most in our experience. So it's looking for those opportunities where you can have a genuine interaction as a way into this sort of influence. The other note here I think is important is that, I think a lot of people, when they think about Gen Z, which is, such a huge generation and so appealing to so many brands to really reach this huge swath of people, is it's not only about influencing each other, but also it's about influencing their families and people who are looking to them to be sort of cultural arbiters in a certain way. I think that's not the most profound idea. Youth culture has kind of always driven culture, but it's important to remember that there's a real value in if you can find these lasting and authentic connections beyond just your specific audience. It kind of can reverberate outward from that as well. And then obviously amplification. Just as you can, as a brand, can provide partners with your own platform and your own audience, they can do that the same. That's pretty standard and pretty easy to understand. But I think it's also one step deeper than that, in that it's not just about peers and your own specific networks of friends that you know. It's a lot of what we're seeing now is the algorithms on places like TikTok in particular are moving into interest groups. So you're really reaching more of a sub community as opposed to like a friend group or a friend network, if that makes sense, if it's done, correctly and in an interesting way. A little bit more about community building. I think the basis for when we talk about community building, we're often thinking of it from a brand point of view in, well, what can this person do for me? What can this person do for the brand? And it's easy to kind of look at it in a very transactional way. And I think the real key question that you need to ask yourself in the interest of building an authentic connection is, what can you offer your community? So, I'm a big proponent, and Depop is a big proponent of obviously fairly compensating people for their time financially, because that's what it's all about. It's, you're making someone's effort and their work. You're working on that together. So you definitely want to have there be financial compensation. But what else is there? What, at the end of the day, when the paycheck is signed, what are you doing? How are you sort of offering a bigger, value exchange? Are you allowing them in to do something that they've always wanted to do, that you have the resources to help enable? Are you creating something, like I said, that's lasting in the culture with a little bit more meaning? So I think coming at it from that perspective is really, really useful. And in this case, it isn't just about talent and influencers. That mindset can also carry over into building your own audience and your own loyal community in that regard as well. And I think it also really needs to be something to be fully successful. It needs to be baked into the business strategy. So it's not just a marketing expense or a marketing exercise. It's really finding those insights and coming at it from a holistic point of view of, you're here to help your community do something better in whatever that may be based on your individual brand, and understanding that value exchange of what that means is sort of the first step toward community building. Some additional points that we talk about a lot at Depop, and I think are transferable to other companies, are these ideas of hire, inspire, and then support and empower. So you can try all day to reach a community that you are not a part of by observing people from that community, by looking at them and their purchase behaviors, or all of those sort of elements that are available. That data exists, you can see it. But there will always be a missing link and an outside in if you're not actually supporting internally people and empowering people internally who are members of that community to speak to them directly. It doesn't really matter what the community is. If that's what you think you have the most to offer, and that's your sort of target audience and the community you really want to foster, you need those voices inside, and you need a way for them to be heard to have any kind of real lasting impact. I also think there's the transactional element, but like I mentioned earlier about this idea of conversation, that trickles through into your output. I think there's always something really exciting about this idea of like surprise and delight, and like, doing something a little bit unexpected to keep people engaged, and also then making places where there's a conduit for conversation, so that it's not just a one-way kind of you're amplifying all this information out there. What are the ways in which you're receiving information to understand more about the things that your community wants you to do? That should be informing business decisions, marketing certainly, but also just sort of your overall strategy should be really listening and making sure you have those feedback channels open. And then obviously looking at things like a tangible benefit for your community beyond your product offering is a really great thing to do, because it deepens that community's connection to you. It shows that you're listening and understanding them. And it's also, I think, just a way to make sure that you always have a mindset of keeping community first in ways that they can see and feel. And so I think these are just some examples about, resources, making resources available, certainly about funding projects from within your community that will help them achieve things they want to achieve. And then mentorship and education, I think, is also really important to have those demonstrable ways that you can show it's been a long-term commitment on your brand over time. I know that we are actually don't have a ton of time, so this is available on YouTube, but this is one example of tapping into networks that we did at Depop. We have a program called the Now Next program, which is an ongoing series with different cohorts of sellers in different markets, sort of with different immediate objectives, but all sort of demonstrative of this long-term commitment to developing entrepreneurial skills on Depop, focused on what we can actually offer them. So we know, because we're a marketplace, we can give them skills to make their Depop shops better, and to give them sort of the insights that we have as a business that will ultimately benefit them, because it's creating funding, it's creating a brand, it's sort of doing whatever their individual goals are. And we really look at it as we take a cohort of usually between 5 to 10 people at a time, and then kind of give them all the tools to then go out and do what they need to do, and also tap into their own networks while they're doing it, and empower other people with the information that they've gleaned from the project. So it's definitely not just about those 5 to 10 people. It's sort of built in a way where it can kind of carry on, and thus you're really kind of fostering a community in that regard. There we go. It's a little long, so we'll skip it for now, but it's on YouTube. This is another project that we did that was specifically around events and activations and circularity, which is important to us, called our Depop Collaborator project. We did some in New York, LA, and London in the last year. And it was really just, this was tangibly based in funding projects, the passion projects of young creatives, but it was also about giving them an opportunity to speak to their community about what they want to speak about, and sort of going out from there. And it was also just really fun to get, after 2 years of lockdown, to get back out in the world and really engage and interact with your community face to face. So it's not just behind, emails and the app and things like that.
Keep hard.
Just kind of quickly want to go through a little bit about what specifically influencer projects were in the past and where they're kind of moving now. I touched upon this a little bit, so I'll kind of go through relatively quickly, but historically, when you think about the influencer economy, it was very much a paid proposition. So a brand pays an influencer to post content, sometimes with specific copy requirements or very clear art direction and timing of when it can go live, what channels, how many, all of that. And the hope was that it would lead to a conversion to purchase. That is complicated by a lot of the things that we see here. Consumers are more savvy, kind of know when they're being sold, even as they're being sold things in different ways. Obviously, government disclosure policies kind of put that out in the open in a way that I think is necessary. It's there for a reason. But there's also just sort of diminishing returns that you're battling the algorithm. These things have sort of diminishing returns. And so and this is also a really key thing, is young people are now growing up having been marketed to by influencers. So it's a native sort of understanding in a way where it was kind of novel for people of my generation, because it was new in our lifetime. We were already used to kind of traditional marketing, and now we had this. So that idea about something feeling false or inauthentic is a hurdle to overcome unless you sort of adapt your tactics and your kind of collaboration there. So some compelling principles, if I do say so myself, were I think this idea of sort of loosening up. You're tapping into people who are experts when you tap into them. They know how to speak to their community. It's what they've built their careers and their livelihood on. So let them kind of run free is really what we like to say. You can see it very clearly on the difference between the type of content that's on a basic level posted on Instagram versus TikTok. It's a lot more DIY on TikTok, where it's kind of overly polished at this point on Instagram. And that's just one element. It's really letting people do what they do best is so key. And it also shines. Even if you have the ad disclosures, even if people know it's an ad, you still know when it's something real and there's an energy and an excitement behind it. And that is so much more effective. But it does require brands to be willing to play in that space and to experiment a little bit, and to not hold so tightly to your brand, house codes or whatever the case may be, and let people kind of play with that, obviously within reason. I think there are so many data points to support this idea of shared values resonating much more over just looking at things like reach and engagement. Kind of anecdotally, I've seen certainly evidence where when we look at a micro-influencer, as the sort of industry terminology says, who doesn't have necessarily a huge number of followers on their accounts, but they're doing something that resonates with a small community that they've sort of built. And that through one glance of certain of like the old way of thinking, you would never engage with someone who had that. But in reality, it's a great opportunity to give someone a leg up financially and kind of support them in their growth, but also to just understand a community that you might not be reaching because it might be too small to be on your radar, or it might be something that, you know, is a new or emerging sub-community. Not being afraid to really look for people who you think are authentically expressing your values and to work with them rather than just the big fish in an increasingly bigger pond. And then again, this idea of mutual benefits is really, really interesting for us. We've seen a lot of success with it with things like the Now Next project and our collaborator projects, where you need to pay people for their time and for their labor and their creative, you know, mindset and things like that. But what else is it beyond a paycheck that you can also offer them? And have that be a real two-way street is just this a sort of mindset shift that I think a lot of talent is expecting at this point to a degree. And even if they haven't really caught up to it, you know, it gets kind of exhausting turning out the same type of content. I'm sure there are things that influencers want to do that they've just maybe not been given the opportunity to do. And when you have that connection between a partnership and a purpose, it's the proof is there in what you're producing. It always feels more engaging and exciting. Yes, and then this is just a note about sustainability specifically, because that's a huge one of our values that we hold really closely. And you can see that it does still translate when it's authentic. You do have that long-term commitment that you will see most likely in the sort of bottom line metrics that a lot of companies want to see. You might have to give it time. It might not be the instant conversion, but it's about that equity building over time that you can't really fake. And then because we are getting close to the end, I'll run through quick some brand partnerships do's and don'ts. So this is less working with talent and more working with you know, other sort of peer brands or brands outside of your space. This quote is kind of funny. Obviously, you know, it's speaking to a specific type of brand, but this idea that it should be, you shouldn't try to hide what this is. It's a collaboration because it's fun, because you want to get some more eyes on your product, or you want to make something really interesting, or it's just something exciting and new. You don't need to mask it as anything more than that, because that's what it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. That has a lot of value. So some do's and don'ts to that end. Like I said, this idea of surprise and delight, this idea of creating something that lasts. We are in a culture of collaboration where it's very easy for these things to have a short spike and then go away. But if you create something that can stand on its own outside of just like a marketing asset or an advertising asset or a social media asset, that someone 5 years from now, when the product you're selling has sold out, can still look at that piece of content or look at that magazine or, you know, a song, whatever it is, and still get some value out of it. That's real long-term positive impact. And it's showing, I think, a real connection to culture in a way that most brands would kill for. Hopefully not kill, but you know what I mean. On a operational note, to sort out ways of working first. You're working, you know, at your company, depending on where you are, you may have 4 levels of approval. Double that, because someone else on your partner side company does too. So get all the logistics and the ways of working out in the open, and then that will hopefully smooth over that process. I think don't dive in before you're ready. If your brand is super new, try to really focus on what you can do that will sustain you in the long term in terms of community building and getting your sort of brand vision and values and mission straight before you dive in, because you are ultimately sharing a spotlight and there's a time and a place, and too early, I think you just won't see the same kind of impact. And also to that end, don't expect more from them than what they can do. It is about enhancing brand positioning and affinity and giving you an opportunity to articulate your message and your mission in a new way. But if you don't have that to begin with, it's not going to come from a brand partnership. You can't just make it from that. And then again, don't forget about your community. 2 brands coming together is powerful, but 2 brands coming together to uplift and empower your community is even more powerful. So get them involved directly in the campaign, in the promotional assets, in the ideation, in whatever is being produced. And it has a really, really exciting impact potential there. So quickly, and then we'll have some time for Q&As. You can see these on the screen. I'll just run through them. Authenticity can't be stressed enough. Try to find that real bond and those real shared values. look at it as a conduit for storytelling. What are you ultimately trying to get out of any of these partnerships from a storytelling point of view that makes sense, that your partners can also get. There aren't shortcuts to fast tracking community building. You need to spend time and to care and nurture, because it is a real relationship in a lot of ways. Always create something that you're proud of, that is worth talking about, that you can stand behind. And then obviously, when in doubt, cut it out. If it's not right, it's not right. You can pull the plug and give yourself that space to really consider and not rush into these sorts of projects. So that was that. I feel like I sped through those, but hopefully we have some time for some questions from the chat. So this one, can you speak to commission only 50% compensation versus an upfront fee in terms of preference by influencers? That is a good question. And I think, I think you, part of what is important in that value exchange is understanding what the non-negotiables are for you and for your partner. And so it's, you know, if a partner if that's what they need to be able to do their work. So if they're creating something and they need to get paid upfront to be able to you know, buy the materials they need, or to be able to afford to take a day off from their day job, or whatever the case may be, I think that's a very reasonable request. If you're not in a position financially to do that, you don't want to have that. You know, it's probably not the right time to go into a partnership in general. I think it's good to have an open conversation, and to, as a brand that is in some ways in a sort of position of power, to listen to you know, what the specific needs are, and to really consider and try to make it work. But transparency in payment, including also how long it will take you to process an invoice and pay it out, is super key to set those expectations up front. Would you have any advice for small brands that don't have available cash to pay influencers? We gift influencers product, etc. I think again, that transparency and expectation setting there. If you want someone to work with you and to consider working with you, and you can't pay them, some people might be fine with that. It might be a really exciting opportunity to create something cool that you can kind of co-fund, and that money just doesn't exist to pay them in a fee. If they're fine with that, go for it. I think you just have to be upfront to make sure that there's those expectations are set from the beginning, and so that no one is expecting something down the line or anything is left unclear. It's someone's own prerogative if they want to do something for free because they like the product or they like the opportunity, but definitely be super transparent. I'm saying, like, in the first introductory communication, like, let them know that, because they can, if it's not an option for them for their own sort of financial well-being, they can cut it out right then, and you're not wasting anybody's time. Red flags to consider when starting a collaboration. I think red flags for me are always about you know, a willingness to actually collaborate. So, like, you know, what are the services that you're providing, or the deliverables that you're providing with your collaborator or your partner, and what are they doing in return? Sometimes a lack of willingness to commit in those early conversations might be because they're inexperienced or need some time to figure it out. Sometimes it might be because they're not going to give you the same level of support for a project that you would want or expect, or that you're providing. So I think that's a big one, is that lack of clarity. It's not necessarily like, you haven't told me in our first conversation what you can do, so I'm going to cut it out, but it's like, really interrogate that and really make sure, because it could be a potential red flag, and that's definitely a big one. And also put it in the contract that you have, or the agreement that you have, your expectations, because even if at the end of the day you might not want to go into litigation with a brand or a partner, it's helpful to have those expectations mapped out in a document, written down, that you can see and look back on it and reference, and you can say, like, this is what we agreed to, so what are you going to do? And then, you know, you can go from there. I think this might have to be the last one because we're at time. Difference between collaboration and partnership is sort of, difference between collaboration and sponsorship is sort of in the name. I think there are elements of collaboration and sponsorship most times, but oftentimes sponsorship is a very transactional. This brand gives you, or this entity gives you, X amount of dollars, and it comes with these deliverables or these sort of promotions on your side, and that's kind of where it ends. That's not a cut and dry rule, because obviously there's always some sort of negotiation and conversation there. A collaboration is really more about like co-creating something. So there can be elements of collaboration within a sponsorship, but at surface level, that's kind of it. And I'll do one more really quick and then we'll go. How do you negotiate with influencers effectively for marketing? I think it's the most effective negotiation is knowing your non-negotiables. So enter into it with the things that you're willing to talk about and consider changes, and the things that you're not. And that may take some trial and error to get to that place, but having that sense of this is what I can do, and this is what I need, and this is what I expect from you, and when you expect to do it, is really great. It cuts down a lot of time for you. It also, I think, you can kind of get a sense of how willingness this is going to be a two-way street versus a transaction, and then you can make whatever decision works best for you from there. So I feel like I spoke very quickly. Hopefully it was digestible. We had a lot to get through there, and thank you for your questions and for logging on. I think, you know, the links to the videos are on YouTube. Any questions or anything that I can talk about further, our friends at the Purposeful Project can potentially, I don't want to speak for them, but can maybe kind of be the conduit to get some questions there. But thanks so much for your interest and for logging on. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the Purposeful Project for being such great partners and supporters always.